Today we're going to be looking at what is sport exercise science in 2023. Now this is a new podcast. We're going to try and move away from looking at podcasts in kind of one guy just moaning into a camera with a microphone by them. Trying to keep it to the point but long enough so that you can listen to it, enjoy it in its long form. So what is sports science and is it worth doing in 2023? The question is it worth doing sports science at all? Why do we want to do SES? Why would anyone want to do sport exercise science? We're going to utilise the short term of sport exercise science, or SES. Sometimes this may be referred to as SPECS. When I went to University Leeds Beckett, it was known as SPECS. It's probably only known there and a few other places. But generally, it's known as SES. What actually is sport exercise science? To answer that, we have to actually answer what is sports science and what is exercise science. Sports science, or should I say sport in a academic term, really means competitive fitness, competitive sport, athletics, football, cricket, rugby, American football. You get the idea. If there's a competition, it's a sport. Sports science is literally the science of competitiveness in that aspect. Exercise science, let's call it for what it is. It's the science of fitness. And when we do exercise science, we're looking at how can we improve functions of the body? How can we get people exercising more? Even, for instance, how can we prevent trips in old age people? So these are the kind of things where we can apply this stuff to. Now, there is obviously going to be an overlap between sports science and exercise science. Sports science and fitness, because you have to be fit to be able to do sport. And likewise, some people may do sport as fun and to exercise rather than just doing it competitively. Moving on from there, we're going to talk about the main discipline. There are three main disciplines. Psychology, that is human behaviour. How do we behave regarding sport and fitness? You've also got physiology and anatomy, how the body works. And finally, the third domain is biomechanics and kinesiology. Biomechanics and kinesiology basically is how the body moves through space. It's basically the physics regarding sports science, exercise science. It can also be how sporting objects and projectiles move through space. Those are the three main domains, and all other domains will fit into those three domains somewhere along the lines. They may utilise more than one of those domains. There are 8 secondary domains, which you'll be able to see on the screen now. And those are the main domains we utilise in sport exercise science. They are based within those 3 domains. They take certain aspects from those 3 domains. For instance, nutrition takes aspects from physiology and anatomy. That can also, when we're regarding why we eat, when do we eat, if we've got something in front of us to eat, if people have an eating disorder, for instance, can take place, or it focuses in that domain of psychology. There are other domains that may include all 3 parts of those domains. On the side note, you find out that at university there is a lot, snobbery is not the right word, but generally the fields of interest that take the university, and they will consider what they think is more important regarding sport exercise science. For instance, at Leeds Beckett, my university, they consider nutrition a core aspect and part of sport exercise science, and they made sure that it was a core module that you had to take at the undergraduate degree. At my undergraduate university, University Wales Institute Cardiff, or Cardiff Met, nutrition was only 2 optional lectures. They did not see it as important at all towards the degree, nor important towards sport exercise science. So you will find when you go to university, or if you research and read up on sport exercise science, different people will consider the main domain, so to speak, as different to other people. There's another domain we've really got to talk about, and you see in the Australian system that a lot of people are including this. I don't particularly like this as a extra 4th domain, because I believe it can fit into things like research methods, but also fit into things like physiology, anatomy, and that is the domain of biometrics. Measurements of the body. Now, it's highly debatable, like I said. Some people think it is as the 4th domain. Personally, I think it's just another part of those 3 domains. We have to answer, what's the difference between quantitative and qualitative. Now, you're thinking, whoa, what the hell are you talking about? What are these random words? Quantitative is to do with numbers. Qualitative is research that's based in qualities. And everything in sport exercise science will either fit into quantitative or qualitative. Quantitative research is your numbers, your how fast can someone go, how big is their squat, for instance. Whereas qualitative is more subjective. It's how does a person feel in a certain environment. We then got another subject area called post-qualitative. Now, post-qualitative is a movement from the qualitative from branches of research. And they produce highly rich subjective research, but require you, the viewer or the reader of the journal article, to come up with a conclusion based upon the scientific evidence provided. And this could be done in the form of a poem, an ethnography, which you take loads of people's different views and you put it down into one defining text, a video, whatever. It's the problems with post-qualitative research, though, it blurs the differences sometimes between art and science. Quite often science is plain, boring, down to earth really, and it explains what the subject is utilising the scientific knowledge. Now, the problems with post-qualitative is that it allows you to make that answer up rather than utilising the scientist's view of the research, a possibly more educated view in that respect and a more experienced view to come up with the answers. Now, there's problems with quantitative and qualitative research as well. Quantitative research is, here you go, here's the results. 60% more people run faster last year. Okay, actually no, let's utilise a better example here. In the World Athletics Championships, they found that a vast majority of people were reacting within the 0.9 barrier. And that's very close to actually being a full start. With those rulings, why are more people within the 0.8s, the 0.9s? It doesn't exactly explain that. It could be that the athlete is trying to predict the start. It could be the fact that athletes are now stronger, they're more professional sprinters, so their bodies are able to react faster. A qualitative research is able to get the depth, but not the numbers. It can tell you a lot in detail of something, but it can't tell you in depth what it is. It can tell you why it is, but not what it is, whereas quantitative tells you what's happening, but not why it's happening. Some universities like to play their trump card. That is polymerization. And sometimes you may want to combine the two in multi-methods. And there are other domains that will fall into the arts that we're looking at. More people are doing sports broadcasting, which is definitely an arts-based thing, but that's really a video for another day. So, is it worth actually getting into sports science? And I'm probably going to break a few hearts here when I say this. Sport exercise science is probably one of the most oversubscribed fields there is at the moment. When you finish your university, you'll be competing with lots more people for a small amount of jobs. And this pandemic has shown, as well as what's happening now, that possibly it's only going to get harder. 60% of students, this is in the UK, 60% of students who you go and do a sport exercise science undergraduate degree don't end up doing a sport exercise science job once they finish. They don't end up in that career, they move off elsewhere. If we look at some of the wage packages which you can see on the screen now around you, you suddenly realise that actually these guys don't get well paid either, depending on their job. So for instance, a sports psychologist is 8 years worth of education to potentially earn between £18,000 to £23,000 final package wage as of 2021. So with this information, why is it worth doing? Well, the jobs you can do, you can expand on from here. It's really, sport exercise science is really, really good for those wanting to become sport exercise science lecturers, and that's really where the money is. If you are an athlete, then it's worth doing that way because you can understand how you well perform. If you want to be a coach of some description, like a strength conditioning coach, it can help you improve yourself, prove what you're applying to those athletes, your practice basically, improve that practice. But for everyone else, what can it be good for? Well, if you do a sports management, and that's another area where there's money in, sport management and development, more sports management, You can go off into the management of sport where there is money, or you can go off elsewhere into different types of management, providing that you have a business aspect to you other than your sports management. Sports development, likewise, you can go off into schools, help develop that way, but there isn't really much jobs outside of the schools. You could go into personal training or fitness, and that would really help you with your practice. Nonetheless, you don't need a sport exercise science degree to become a personal trainer. And the vast majority of personal trainers, put it lightly, personal training really, short-term job or it's a side hustle. There's very few career personal trainers. We could also go into teaching at schools. And a lot of them do try and transition from utilising their sport exercise science degree and move into education via a PGCSE here in the UK or whatever relevant qualification you need in your countries. Now in the UK, PE teaching is, as you probably guessed, oversubscribed compared to other areas, and they're really struggling to find people to do science. So if you've got a sport exercise science degree, they might try and push you away from coaching into science or do a combination of the two. Now the UK government can, and this is open to anyone who applies to become a teacher inside the UK, offer grants and scholarship for doing science teaching, but they don't offer grants and scholarship for PE teaching. Many of the people who complete a sports science degree often will or may go into nutrition and dietetics. So what is a dietitian or a nutritionist? A dietitian is different to a nutritionist. A nutritionist is someone who can help you with your nutrition, your basic information regarding how to eat healthy, how to get stronger, for instance. A dietitian is a more of a medical aspect, has more medical knowledge needed. It's helping with people with eating disorders, or it's more than that, but a nutritionist cannot call themselves a dietitian. Here in the United Kingdom, a nutritionist is a protected title. Now in other areas of the world, a nutritionist is not a protected title. So anyone could potentially call themselves a nutritionist of something, even though what they're saying is absolute nonsense, or preaching is absolute nonsense. So whereas a dietitian, you can't call yourself a dietitian, you can't do the work of a dietitian because you risk being sued. Sued because you're potentially causing damage to that person. And you can go into different forms of analytics as well. A lot of people doing sport exercise science have moved more into the arts now and focused on things to do with social media regarding sport exercise science, or just regarding sport or fitness in general. And there's been a demand since the pandemic years, an increased demand, that they need people basically to do more sports broadcasting. There's more jobs in that sphere than what there are places available. People aren't filling those places quick enough for the jobs created. And a lot of companies, for instance Arsenal, have created their own sport, and even Tottenham, the football clubs for instance, have created their own sports broadcasting, their own broadcasting companies, and they need people to fill them. You're not necessarily talking about starting off at the BBC. If you can start off at the BBC, wow, you've done well. But you're more likely going to end up at lower, smaller firms and then work your way up into it. Now, before we go into sports broadcasting, it's not really sport exercise science, nor is most of the medical field. However, there are aspects and elements of which can help you get into that medical area, not necessarily as a doctor or nurse, maybe somewhere in the research side of it. In other words, non-clinical roles or other areas that help you expand onto your career. Another common path people usually take after a sport exercise science degree is going down and doing physiotherapy for sports therapy or massage. Although doing a physiotherapy based course is helpful, university-based course, it's the type of career where you don't necessarily need to have a university course to be able to do. As long as you do an accredited course in physiotherapy, you're able to then potentially work as a physiotherapist in a hospital or privately. This is going to sound incredibly stupid, but we need more from social media. That's right, you can get a career in social media regarding fitness and sports science. In fact, we need more sports scientists online to help counter the misinformation and fake news.
15 minutes per day to melt belly fat and build incredible abs. It was developed by the US Army for the Navy SEALs to massively improve their strength training and combat.
So we're going to move on from and talk really about what is the future of sport exercise science. And ultimately the future of sport exercise science is going to be regarding more and different types of degrees. There's been an increasing number of types of degrees. When it comes to sport exercise science, there may be less jobs in certain areas. As we go into this new era of post-Ukraine, post-COVID, of less people wanting to spend potentially less money on their backroom staff, and they'll decide which of their backroom staff are. Sports psychology, for instance, has always been underplayed, even though it's one of the main domains, because there is no you cannot physically see someone improve, whereas we take something like strength conditioning, which is not a core domain, it's always going to be considered higher than the psychologist. What we're starting to see as well, to put it into perspective over the years, as you can see on the screen now, is that in sports science, some people like to take the piss. And in some aspects, some of the roles are considered care-based jobs, like sports psychology. And you're supposed to focus more on the care of the athlete rather than money. And I've had an email actually from someone high up into the British Psychological Society asking us to take a section off about, and we had to word this carefully, do with money as a psychologist. I didn't even think it was ethical to put that into our podcasts. I do feel in some aspects some sports science roles will be paid less, whereas others that help you gain money or gain a company money will be pushed up and paid more. There are certain linings, for instance, this job here at the English Institute of Sport being paid $39,000, which is really good payment. Generally in sports science, you're looking around low £20,000 at the moment. This is in pound sterling. So you're looking for low 20s and a potentially high 20s at most as your career unfolds. Obviously, inflation will increase that payment further, but you are looking between low to mid £20,000. I hope this helps explain to you what sport exercise science is, your career path, and what you can potentially do in sport exercise science if you are looking to go into a university degree or just find that sport exercise science is really interesting. I'm Adam McCarthy of Immersive Sports Science, and I'll see you in the next one.